Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking Robert Greene's highly controversial masterpiece, The Art of Seduction. And look, this isn't just about romance. No, it's an absolute masterclass in psychological influence, power dynamics, and the hidden levers of human behavior. Get ready, because you're about to view literally every social interaction through a completely different lens. Here's the seducer's playbook we're going to map out for you today. First, the psychology of power. Then, the seductive characters, choosing the right victim, the seductive process, and finally, moving in for the kill. Let's get to it. Part 1. The psychology of power. So history's earliest seductresses, like Cleopatra, they realized pretty quickly that brute physical strength is incredibly rigid and, honestly, highly fleeting. Think about it. If a king relies on violence, his power is literally only as good as his army. But psychological power, that's seduction, and it lasts. By working on the mind and stimulating fantasies, these seducers engineered a form of mental control that turned the world's most powerful conquerors into highly pliant emotional slaves. Wild, right? The famous 17th century French courtesan Ninon de L'Enclos put it perfectly. She said, "Much more genius is needed to make love than to command armies." And that really hits the nail on the head when it comes to the dark psychology of Greene's book. Seduction is essentially a calculated act of warfare. It requires treating life as theater, completely stepping outside your own ego, and carefully, deliberately engineering an environment where your target falls hopelessly under your spell. Which brings us to part 2, the seductive characters. Now, before you can seduce anyone else, you've got to look inward. You have to identify what makes you uniquely attractive. Greene actually categorizes these natural strengths into 9 distinct types. You've got the infectious desire of the rake, the aesthetic sensibility of the ideal lover, maybe the comforting manipulation of the charmer, or the sheer confidence of the charismatic. Your goal here? Take a truly honest look at yourself and fully embrace the single archetype that projects your natural strengths. What's really fascinating is how the siren proves that absolutely no one, and I mean no one, is immune to seduction. You know, you might assume that highly logical, rigid intellectuals would be the hardest to influence, right? Actually, scratch that. Because their lives are so governed by heavy responsibility, they are often the most susceptible to the siren's promise of pure, unadulterated physical release. It's a total game changer. But on the total opposite end of the spectrum, we find the anti-seducer. These are the deeply insecure, frankly repelling traits you absolutely must root out of your character. The anti-seducer is so self-absorbed, they literally cannot step into someone else's shoes. And in this game, self-absorption is completely fatal. If you're constantly stuck in your own head worrying about your own anxieties, you can't possibly cast a spell over anyone else. All right, let's move on to part 3, choosing the right victim. So, your character is honed and the hunt begins. Now, seduction is basically impossible if you target someone who is already completely contented. Let's be real, happy people just don't need you. Instead, you have to hunt for a specific void among Greene's 18 victim types. For example, the drama queen desperately needs pain and excitement, or the professor who's trapped in a mental prison and secretly craving physicality. You have to identify exactly what is missing in their life and become that exact piece. But hey, here is a really crucial rule to remember. Never, ever try to seduce someone who is exactly like you. I mean, if you're a cold cut, why go after another cold cut? It's literally like trying to jam 2 identical puzzle pieces together. It just doesn't work. There's no void to fill, and that completely destroys the tension, the mystery, and the entire dynamic necessary to make the seduction work. Okay, part 4, the seductive process. So, you know who you are, and you've picked your target. The execution phase relies on 4 main phases of psychological penetration. You start by separating them from their comfortable world, using a really indirect approach. Then, you lead them astray by mixing pleasure with a healthy dose of confusion. Next up, you push them to the precipice using extreme emotional measures, before finally moving in for total physical surrender. And throughout this entire timeline, keep in mind that direct persuasion is absolutely your enemy. If you just tell someone what you want, their natural defenses are going to shoot right up. So instead, you have to master the art of insinuation. Drop really subtle hints. Use fleeting looks, passing comments. You want to bypass their conscious resistance entirely and plant those seeds deep, deep down in their unconscious mind. Actually, the entire thesis of Greene's book relies heavily on one distinct factor: taking your time. Seduction is never, ever a hurried transaction. It's much more like a slow, hypnotic ritual. By employing immense patience and using very calculated surprises, you keep your target entirely off balance. You want them constantly guessing what you're going to do next. Reaching phase 3 introduces what is probably one of the playbook's darkest, yet most effective tactics. It's called affecting a regression. Basically, by playing the quiet, completely non-judgmental therapist, the seducer gets the target to open up about childhood wounds or deep past disappointments. And then, they step right in to provide the exact validation the victim never received. This creates an unbearably deep, incredibly powerful psychological hook. This leads us right into part 5, moving in for the kill. The trap is totally set. The victim's mind is entirely occupied with you, they are isolated, and they are craving your presence. But right before the climax, you do something completely unexpected. You give them space to fall. By suddenly taking a step back, maybe missing an appointment, or just acting completely neutral, you induce this deep, deep panic in them. It's a brilliant reversal that forces the victim to become the aggressor. Now, they're the ones pursuing you to win back your affection. So they surrender, and the game is won. But that leads us to the ultimate question. What happens next? Because once the fantasy becomes just everyday reality, the psychological spell is in immense danger of breaking entirely. Make no mistake about it, familiarity is the absolute death of seduction. Green lays out a pretty brutal reality for the aftermath here. Disenchantment is totally natural, and a long, drawn-out, clinging goodbye, that's just painful for everyone involved. So you're essentially left with two choices. You can either sever ties swiftly and cleanly to move on to your next target, or if you actually want to stick around, you have to continuously re-seduce them. You have to actively inject new drama, slight absences, maybe even a little bit of pain, just to prevent that fatal familiarity from taking root. Well, it's certainly an unapologetically dark and amoral look at human psychology, isn't it? It leaves us with a pretty uncomfortable question at the end of the day. Are our deepest desires truly our own, or are we all just waiting for the right person to come along and pull the strings? We just captured the essentials of this highly controversial book in 8 minutes or less. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to In 8 Minutes and never miss what matters.